A Peloton? Give it up for our first-time rider.
All right, first ride. I'm a little nervous, but excited.
All right, so Peloton lit up the internet this week with this ad that went viral. The commercial shows a husband buying the $3,300 stationary bike for his wife and her chronicling her journey over the following year using that bike. Now, some people online called the ad sexist and out of touch. But is this just another example of a culture in search of something to be outraged over? Kat Rosenfield is a culture writer, and we reached her in Norwalk, Connecticut. Thank you for joining us, Kat.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so why don't we just first lay it out. What is the controversy that everyone is talking about with the Peloton wife?
Well, the Peloton ad obviously really struck a nerve, and what's sort of funny about it is that it's a straightforward piece of holiday advertising. It's got a straightforward message. Basically, our product is good, buy our product. But people started reading into it or sort of projecting their own baggage, their own narratives, their own relationship histories onto it, and concluded that it might actually be secretly a story about a bad, evil husband buying an unwanted exercise bike for his wife, to kind of force her to exercise because he doesn't like her body or wants her to be thinner.
Now, one of the questions that I've seen is, in terms of doing marketing for a product like this, no question there are teams and teams of people who are going through the data and researching who's using this and how they're using it. Do you think that how much of that research and data went into creating this ad to make it effective? And how much do you think they actually gave thought to the fact that it could be misinterpreted in this sort of way by the public?
I think a lot of research and a lot of data certainly went into the ad. If you know anybody who uses a Peloton, it does capture what people love about these bikes and why they're so devoted to them. It has a really kind of a cult following, but like a lot of semi-religious experiences, it can look a little weird or maybe even a little sinister to people who aren't part of that particular church or flock or movement. So I think that what happened here was they were listening to feedback from their users, from the people who are really, really into Peloton and really love their bikes, and tried to create an ad that really incorporated the journey that their users are describing, not understanding how that might look to people who don't understand what's fun about these bikes or don't like them. And I think it's also arguably a hard thing to capture when you're selling a fitness product, when you're trying to sell a sort of an almost spiritual transformation instead of a physical one. That's a hard thing to incorporate, to sell in an advertisement.
And what's interesting, too, and we want to broaden out this discussion about outrage culture, call-out culture, whatever you want to call it. But this is another example of seemingly benign images being projected and people really, or the ad itself in this case, or topics in other cases, really taking on a life of their own online.
Yeah, people were sort of reading into this like it was a piece of cinema, looking for the twist, like it was an M. Night Shyamalan film instead of a TV commercial.
And in terms of this culture that we're seeing, this is just one example of it. What do you think is behind how often we're seeing people really get up in arms about something like this that that the intention wasn't necessarily to provoke?
I mean, I think, outrage is pretty much the fastest traveling emotion online, which is where the conversation about the Peloton ad was taking place. And people do get a kick out of hating on, tone deaf or, ridiculous around the holidays and then around the Super Bowl. There's always that conversation going on. I think there is an incentive because outrage is kind of the emotion that works best on Twitter for people to frame their conversations in that way, even maybe to position themselves as far angrier than they actually are, because that's how you go viral.
Do you think that when it comes to people having such strong opinions about relatively benign images, as we've been saying. Do you think that that undermines the sort of larger issues that people are in fact outraged about, and some feel people should, in a general sense, be very outraged about?
I mean, certainly there's such a thing as outrage fatigue, which you can get if you spend too much time online kind of marinating in that particular emotion. I think, yes, there's definitely a question of, are we just too outraged too frequently for it to count when something literally outrageous happens?
And what's the sort of, I guess, risk with something like that, long term?
I mean, you certainly do run the risk of the next time something genuinely terrible happening, people being too exhausted or too skeptical to kind of get on the bandwagon.
We appreciate all of your thoughts today on this controversy and the broader discussion about outrage culture. Thank you so much for your time today, Kat.
Thank you.
That was Kat Rosenfield, and she is a culture writer.